We just got a ton of new Jujutsu Kaisen information from the Jujutsu Kaisen exhibit in Japan. And there's going to be a lot to go over, not just about the story, but multiple different characters, so make sure you watch through to the very end. Now, where all this information is coming from is during the exhibition tour, you actually are allowed an earpiece with an audio recording that actually takes you through the tour. And most of this had to be memorized and then translated because you're not allowed to record any of it. So first and foremost, like I talked about yesterday, Volume 26 cover is indeed confirmed to be a funeral portrait for Gojo Satoru. Which, of course, has a lot of people saying it's now confirmed that Gojo's not coming back anymore, which, honestly, this does make a lot of sense. As I've mentioned multiple different times, I do want Gojo to come back. At the end of the day, it had to make narrative sense. But considering the fact that they have multiple different ways that they can defeat Sukuna now without Gojo coming back, it makes sense that he really just kind of stays unalived. And the next big one, it turns out that Toji was actually modeled after Jason Statham. For the longest time, a lot of us knew that Toji was modeled after some real-life person because Akutami has stated this in an interview, but we never knew who it was. And knowing that it's finally revealed as Jason Statham does make a lot of sense because their builds are very similar, though in the anime they did jack Toji up and kind of make him significantly bigger. The leanness and build of Jason Statham does match more closely to the manga. So for everyone who keeps saying they want a Toji-like physique, well, now you know that physique that you need to shoot for is actually going to be like Jason Statham's. And now we actually got some insight about the Culling Game arc and how Akutami wanted to handle it a little bit differently than it actually ended up coming out. It says, looking back on the developments of the Culling Game arc, do you notice anything significant? He says, in hindsight, I regret not integrating the rule additions more into battles during the Culling Games arc. What he originally wanted was using accumulated points to add rules during battles, potentially shifting the situations back and forth into other people's favor by adding more and more rules. However, in the end, none of those ideas were utilized at all, and I do think that's a shame. One of the biggest criticisms when it comes to the Culling Games arc from a majority of the community is that it was a little bit complicated. And it seemed needlessly complicated. However, if you were adding in the rules, that would be a great way to shift the tides of battle and make it significantly more interesting to where it would give a lot of motivation to get more points rather than just that motivation simply being around Gojo. Which, of course, is a great plot point in itself, but it would have been a really cool way to integrate that rule and that needlessly complicated feel to actually put into a way that made it seem more strategic. And next, we even got information about Mei, to where the question, again, is a bit roughly translated, but essentially is saying, why did Mei escape in Shibuya instead of unaliving her? To which Gege gives one of the most diabolical answers, saying, I don't think a character should be unalived if readers don't feel any emotion for them like sadness. So the reason that she survived is because he genuinely didn't feel like any of the readers would feel any emotion behind her being unalived. So now we know whenever he unalives our favorite characters, it's 100% to get a reaction out of us, which is why Gojo probably got off screen because it had a huge reaction and he accomplished his mission. Next, we get a question on how Akutami wants to handle finishing moves. When drawing a finishing move, I think not only explaining its power and effects, but also the brushwork is necessary. What kind of mindset do you have when deciding the details of a finishing move? He says, I think it's enough if I can draw it well and coolly. Nothing really special. But then he elaborates, says, there are many aspects where I've given up on my drawing skills, but I still have a strong desire to draw well. I think perhaps this desire is what leads to people to improve like Horikoshi and Fujimoto. So basically, a finishing move for him just needs to look cool, and that's about it. And this little segment about the Black Flash was actually pretty interesting. He says, how was Black Flash born? He says, Mr. Katayama, the editor at the time, said, I want Itadori's finishing move, but nothing quite clicked. He eventually came up to Divergent Fist and then Black Flash shortly after. And this part was especially interesting. He said he liked the idea of limiting it to not just Itadori and the concept that its ability improves upon success. While it has an accidental element, which we already knew, which is why people can't just use it at will, is because a lot of times it's just by chance. It can be used consecutively, making it a turning point. Also, making a technique usable by enemies adds tension to battles, which is why we saw multiple different characters like Mahito and Sukuna being able to use it too. And yes, every time that happened, many times the viewers were like, oh no, the bad guy used it. So again, it really seems like a lot of his motivation is to get a reaction out of the audience, which to me, honestly, is a good thing because you're telling a story for the audience, so you want the audience to be engaged with your story. Now, so far, these are all the questions that we have, though there are significantly more questions, apparently. But the reason we can't get more answered currently is because this is everything that someone who is able to go just remembers. During the exhibit, you're not allowed to take pictures and you're not allowed to record anything, and apparently they have pretty tight security about that. So according to Infinity Exists, who does the translations for this, he says he'll get more information as soon as he can, but it won't be probably until July 15th or after. But apparently this was still a pretty small segment in the amount of questions that were actually asked during the exhibit. There were also supposedly rumors during the audio tour that it was talking about Akutami's next project, though even Infinity Exists says that he has no confirmation of this. So this one is really a bit more hearsay. However, we've always known that that was a possibility because Jujutsu Kaisen was going to be ending this week, and a lot of us assumed that he was already starting a new project, and that's why he wanted to end JJK. Which, in my opinion, I still think is a really good decision because at the end of the day, you don't want a series to run on longer than you have intended. Otherwise, you have to make things up as you go, and then the story starts to fall apart. But this was a ton of new information. Let me know what you guys think about it.